There's a moment that many people do not talk about openly. It is the moment after you prayed honestly, clearly, and with real hope, and nothing happened. You asked God for direction, for clarity, for help with something that truly mattered. A relationship, a decision, a door you hoped would open. You prayed more than once. You tried to trust. You tried to wait patiently. But the situation stayed the same. No clear answer. No obvious movement. Just silence. And after a while, a quiet question begins to form in your mind. Did God hear me at all? In the Bible, there are many moments where people experienced exactly this tension. Not because God was absent, but because the space between prayer and answer often becomes part of the process itself. One of the clearest examples is a man named Daniel. In Daniel chapter 10, Daniel had been praying and seeking understanding from God. He was not praying casually. Scripture says he spent 3 full weeks in mourning and fasting while he waited for understanding. 3 weeks passed with no answer. Then something unexpected happened. An angel finally appeared to Daniel and explained something that most people never think about when their prayers feel unanswered. The angel said that Daniel's prayer had been heard from the very first day. But the answer did not arrive immediately. There was resistance, delay, and a process unfolding that Daniel could not see while he was waiting. Daniel's experience reveals something important. Sometimes the silence we feel is not absence. It is distance between the moment God begins responding and the moment we finally see it. From Daniel's perspective, it looked like nothing was happening. From heaven's perspective, the response had already started. Many people live inside this same gap today. You pray for clarity about your life direction. You ask God for wisdom about where you should go next. You ask Him to close doors that are wrong and open the right ones. But weeks pass, months pass, and everything looks the same. In those moments, it is easy to assume silence means rejection, but Scripture often shows something different. God is frequently shaping something in the waiting that could not exist if the answer arrived immediately. Another example appears in the life of Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah reached a moment of deep exhaustion. Just before this chapter, he had experienced one of the most dramatic public moments of faith in Scripture on Mount Carmel. Fire fell from heaven, and God revealed His power before an entire nation. But immediately after that victory, Elijah fled into the wilderness, overwhelmed and afraid. Eventually he found himself alone on Mount Horeb. There he spoke honestly to God about his exhaustion and discouragement. He had been faithful. He had done what God asked. Yet his situation had not improved the way he expected. God responded, but not in the way Elijah might have imagined. Scripture says a powerful wind tore through the mountains. Then there was an earthquake, then fire. But God was not in those dramatic events. After them came what the text calls a gentle whisper. It was quiet, subtle, easy to miss if Elijah had only been looking for dramatic answers. Sometimes unanswered prayer is not about God withholding direction. It is about learning how to recognize the quieter ways He responds. Many people pray, expecting a moment that changes everything overnight. But in Elijah's story, the answer came through quiet clarity rather than sudden spectacle. And that quiet moment redirected the next chapter of his life. There is another lesser-known story that shows a different kind of waiting. In 2 Kings chapter 4, there was a woman from the town of Shunem. She had shown kindness and hospitality to the prophet Elisha for a long time. Because of her generosity, God promised through Elisha that she would have a son. And the promise was fulfilled. But years later, something unexpected happened. Her son suddenly became ill and died. This was not just loss. This was confusion layered on top of a promise that had already come from God. The woman carried the child to Elisha's room and then immediately set out to find the prophet. When Elisha's servant asked her if everything was all right, her response was simple. "It is well." She said this while carrying a situation that looked completely opposite of well. Eventually, Elisha came and prayed over the child, and life returned. The story is not just about the miracle. It is about the tension between promise and outcome that the woman had to carry before the resolution arrived. From the outside, it looked like God had reversed what He once gave. From her perspective, it may have felt like the promise itself had collapsed. But the story did not end in the moment it looked most confusing. Many unanswered prayers live in that same unfinished space. You prayed for something that seemed aligned with what God was doing in your life. A door seemed to open. Something good began. Then suddenly the situation shifted. And now you are left holding a question that does not have an immediate explanation. Scripture rarely presents faith as a straight line between prayer and fulfillment. More often, it looks like Daniel waiting weeks without understanding. It looks like Elijah learning to recognize God in a whisper instead of a storm. It looks like the woman of Shunem holding tension between what God once promised and what she currently sees. The Bible quietly reveals a pattern. God often begins something internally while circumstances still look unchanged externally. The waiting period becomes a place where identity is shaped. Daniel's persistence deepened his spiritual awareness. Elijah's exhaustion exposed where his strength had been coming from. The woman of Shunem revealed a trust that did not collapse when circumstances suddenly turned. None of them experienced instant resolution. Each of them lived through a stretch where prayer existed without visible confirmation. And yet God was still moving inside those stories. When a prayer feels unanswered, the hardest part is not always the delay itself. It is the interpretation of the delay. Silence easily begins to feel like distance. But Scripture often shows that silence is simply the space where unseen work is happening. God told the prophet Isaiah something that still describes many of these moments. In Isaiah 55, God said that his thoughts are not the same as human thoughts, and his ways are higher than human ways. This was not said to create distance. It was said to explain why certain processes unfold differently than we expect. The answers people pray for often involve more than one moment. They involve timing, preparation, movement that begins quietly before it becomes visible. Many of the most important developments in Scripture happened long before anyone could recognize what God was building. So when a prayer seems to disappear into silence, the story may simply be unfinished. Daniel thought he was waiting alone for 21 days. Elijah thought the power of God had vanished from the moment. The woman from Shunem thought a promise had collapsed in her arms. But none of those stories ended in the place where confusion first appeared. And sometimes the quietest seasons in life are not empty at all. They are simply the part of the story where the answer has begun, but the ending has not arrived yet.